One of the most powerful things you can do in your life is to befriend and own your own shadow. If you're not familiar with the concept of the shadow, essentially what it is a hidden part of ourselves that contain aspects we may not be fully aware of or may not want to acknowledge. And it lives within our unconscious mind, so most people have no idea that it's even there. In this video, I'll be covering what the shadow is and why it's important to acknowledge and integrate your own shadow. Before we begin to understand the shadow, we need to start with the unconscious mind. And humans have two minds, one conscious and one unconscious. And the conscious mind is really if you think about an iceberg, it's the tip of the iceberg that makes up the 5% of our waking reality, whereas the unconscious mind is the 90%, 95% that's underneath the water. And you might be thinking, well, that's kind of hard to believe since most of our interaction with the world is done consciously. But think about all the things that you don't need to think about, right? Such as regulating your breath, pumping the blood in your heart, having dreams, right? Suffice to say that there's a lot more happening below the surface. But that's not even the juicy part, right? The most important parts are the repressed memories, the behavior patterns, and the defenses that we've all internalized from when we were young and how that shapes our behavior today. Have you ever gotten really angry, like really angry, like unshakable rage disproportionate to the situation at hand? Maybe you exploded, right, and done something really out of character, and only until you calmed down did you wonder, like, oh, why did I do that? And this is a great example of your unconscious elements overflowing and taking over your conscious thoughts and your actions. So there's a lot of energy inside each of us that you can learn to cultivate. And once you're able to do that, once you're able to unlock this energy, it's like tapping into a new life force that you never knew was even there. And you'll come to discover that you'll have the courage to do things that you never thought were possible before, right? You have the ability to dream big and actually achieve those goals. And you'll literally have more energy physically, right, to do things like sports and exercise. And honestly, the best part is you'll begin to develop an unshakable belief and confidence that will allow you to accomplish anything you want in your life. And that sounds all good and well. So now we introduce the concept of the personal shadow, which is one of the most important parts to understanding and unlocking its power, right? The brilliant psychiatrist Carl Jung first came up with the concept of the shadow. And honestly, he was way ahead of his time, which is why I'm going to continue to talk about his work on this channel. He noticed in his psychoanalysis patients that aspects of their personalities conflicted with the way that they presented themselves consciously. And you can think of the shadow as all the uglier aspects of your own personality that you don't want to show the world. And quite often these are negative traits, right? The shadow contains traits that are socially or personally perceived as negative, such as anger, envy, greed, arrogance, and selfishness, right? And these are aspects of the self that we would rather not want to admit or recognize because, who wants to be known as a selfish, greedy, arrogant jerk? And emotions that are considered socially unacceptable or uncomfortable, such as shame, guilt, or fear, are also part of the shadow, right? These emotions are repressed or denied in the conscious mind, but they still need to go somewhere, right? And we also have deep-seated beliefs, right, about oneself, often formed during childhood, that contribute to negative self-image that also reside in the shadow. And here's the killer, right? These beliefs hinder our personal growth and well-being later in our adult life, right? Self-sabotage, think about imposter syndrome, right? Belief that one is not good enough. These are all formulated in childhood. So unresolved issues from childhood, such as traumas or unmet needs, find a place in the shadow, and these unresolved experiences can impact adult behavior without conscious awareness. Unfulfilled desires, right? Desires and impulses that are inconsistent with one's own self-image or societal norms can reside in the shadow, right? These may include unfulfilled aspirations, forbidden desires, or fantasies. And this includes cultural taboos, right? Aspects that go against societal or cultural norms, including taboos and forbidden behavior. And the shadow contains elements that are opposite of the persona, right? And the persona is the social mask. It's the facade that we present to the world, and we all wear them, right? While the persona reflects something that's socially acceptable, the shadow harbors what is deemed unacceptable. What's kind of interesting is, surprisingly, the shadow can also contain positive qualities and untapped potentials that individuals might not recognize in themselves, right? So this could include creativity, courage, intelligence, or other strengths that are not fully acknowledged. Elements of the shadow can be shaped by cultural conditioning or inherited traits from our ancestors, right? Certain beliefs, certain prejudices, or cultural biases that we may or may not be consciously aware of or even endorse can still influence behavior from the shadow. So what happens when we don't acknowledge and integrate the shadow is we project that outwards. The shadow often projects its contents onto others, right? So when we strongly dislike a particular trait in somebody else, it indicates that we are unconsciously projecting our own disowned qualities onto that person, right? So this is judgment, right? This is why judgment arises and will continue to arise until we've acknowledged and integrate those, rejected aspects of ourselves. And here's why befriending the shadow matters, right? So owning your own shadow is one of the most important things that you can do in your life. This process of integrating your shadow is called shadow work. And shadow work is not a one-time, do it and forget it. It's a continuous process of self-discovery and integration. And the evolving nature of our minds and our psyche means that new shadow aspects can emerge over time. What happens when you take on this journey is that you become in communication with parts of yourself that you never even knew existed. And you'll find a lot of benefit from this, right? Number one, of course, the most important is increased self-awareness, because integrating the shadow involves acknowledging and understanding the hidden aspects of yourself. And this heightened, new level of self-awareness allows you to recognize, your own motivations, your emotions, and your behaviors a lot more clearly. You'll also become more authentic, because when you accept and embrace the totality of your personality, you can express yourself more genuinely in all aspects of life, right? Including relationships and work. This will carry over to your relationships, because understanding and integrating those hidden aspects of your psyche will lead to healthier communication, increased understanding, right? Increased empathy, and reduced chance of projecting those unconscious contents onto others. You'll also enjoy an increase in emotional resilience, because by confronting and accepting the repressed emotions within the shadow, you can start developing, a better ability to cope with challenging situations, as well as improving emotional regulation and understanding. And this is a really big part of personal and spiritual growth, because the process of integrating the shadow is central to the concept of, individuation, which is the lifelong journey of personal growth and development. It involves becoming more whole and realizing one's full potential, contributing to ongoing personal growth. It's helpful to view the integration of the shadow as even a spiritual journey, because it can lead to a greater sense of purpose, of connection, and a more profound understanding of the human experience. And it's really empowering acknowledging and integrating the shadow, because it'll give you a deeper understanding of yourself and also more self-awareness that allows for more intentional decision-making and an increased sense of control over your own life. One of the most memorable encounters with my own shadow was actually in a dream. Specifically, I was having a lucid dream about breaking into a government facility, and I encountered these various different aspects of my own shadow. There was about 4 or 5 different personalities, and each of them represented a portion of myself that I was repressing. And they all had, and 4 of them had like masks, like masks, like think about those persona masks that you would see, play actors with. And they essentially took those masks off and let me put it on my own face. And they felt very heavy, like they were filled with sadness, filled with grief. And I realized like these are parts of myself that I typically don't express, in my waking life, right? Is feeling sad or feeling, loss, a sense of loss. The act of me trying on the masks in the dream symbolized, me accepting those, aspects of myself and, really acknowledging them. And what's interesting was that there was another character in the dream, and he was a flamboyant man, right? He had a very flamboyant kind of outfit going. It was like pink and yellow. And I started a dialogue with him. I asked him, what his role in my psyche was. And he said that he was the more creative aspects of myself, right? He was the more kind of expressive aspects of myself. And I was actually really surprised that that aspect of my personality was, within my shadow, because in the waking world, I never really, described myself as being that creative, but, I still had that aspect of myself that, I didn't really fully acknowledge, which is my creativity. And I think that's part of the reason why I do, these YouTube videos, because it's a way for me to express myself on camera and share my ideas and, be creative. One of the other times that I've encountered my shadow was on a psilocybin trip. And this time I was wanting to meet my shadow with intention. So I went to the bathroom, I looked in the mirror and I turned the lights off. So all I could see was just a dim reflection of myself in the mirror. And I looked into my own eyes in the mirror and I started to see some really interesting things, right? First, my face started to distort. So I would get facial kind of disfigurations and weird stuff was happening to my eyes and to my nose and to my mouth. And it was like I was looking at other people's faces, right, that weren't my own face. And then the longer I stared, the more these features actually disappeared, and I was left with just a black shadow. It was just a black kind of outline, no facial features, just like my silhouette in the mirror. And I knew that this was my shadow. I knew that I was looking straight into my shadow. And I wasn't afraid of it. And I think because I was anticipating and I was expecting, myself to see it, I kind of braced myself. It was a little bit uncanny, I won't lie. Looking into kind of your own shadow and not seeing your face or not seeing, not seeing your features. But it really just drove home the point that we all have shadows and they are with us, everywhere, right? Whether you, like to acknowledge it or not. This is an aspect of ourselves that, follow us everywhere. Literally, it's our shadow. There's this really profound feeling that you get from not being afraid of yourself, right? Not being afraid of those hidden aspects of yourselves. It's almost like you're discovering this new sort of energy source that you can tap into, this creativity, this new life force that, previously just wasn't there. And I can tell you firsthand experience that I've had a lot of ideas kind of just spring out of my mind, for YouTube, for work, for really anything, from this kind of reservoir of the unconscious. So I want to share some practical tips for getting to know your own shadow. It all starts with self-reflection and it all starts with looking inwards. And I say this every video and I will continue to say it because having an open and curious mind about your own psyche, right, about your own nature of mind is the most important tool and will serve you, for the rest of your life. So a good place to start is asking yourself what emotions or feelings you're not allowing yourself to feel, right? And then giving yourself the space and permission to express those emotions, right? Express those feelings. I know for a lot of guys, it's sadness, right? It's anger, but because we feel a lot of, external kind of societal pressure, we tamp it down instead of, being able to let it out and express it. I have a couple male friends that really need to cry. And if you're watching this video, you know who you are. You can also just read up on the Jungian literature, right? Familiarizing yourself with Jungian concepts by reading books, articles on analytical psychology, and understanding the theory behind, the shadow can provide a framework for your self-exploration. And if you guys are curious, ask me and I'll put a few recommendations for books in the description below. A mindfulness practice is really going to be helpful, right? Observing your thoughts will help you identify projections and, just become more aware of what you're feeling and what your thoughts are day to day. Because a lot of times we're not even aware of what kind of thoughts we're having, which is why keeping a journal to write down your thoughts throughout the day is helpful. And personally, I like to keep a dream journal. I like to kind of jot down the symbols and jot down the images I see in my mind and try to interpret, what my unconscious is telling me. And consider the guidance of a therapist, right? Especially one that is trained in Jungian analysis or depth psychology. A therapist can provide a safe and supportive space for exploring the unconscious and the shadow. Self-compassion is really important, right? Accepting your imperfections and your flaws because nobody's perfect. So don't disown them, right? Accept your insecurities and embrace the totality of who you are without judgment. Become more cognizant of projection, right, when it happens, and personal triggers, right, what really sets you off. And notice situations where you strongly react to others, where you feel a heightened emotional charge, and consider whether you may or may not be projecting the aspects of your own shadow onto those interactions and individuals. You can also express yourself in creative outlets, right, such as making art, writing, or creating music. Creative expression can tap into the unconscious, allowing those hidden aspects of yourself to emerge. And this process can be very therapeutic and revealing. Engaging in inner dialogue is a really great way as well. We're having an inner dialogue with yourself. We tend to think that we only have one kind of dialogue, right? But that's just really our conscious mind. That's really our ego. There's a lot of different parts to our psyche. So you can ask yourself open questions about your motivations, your fears, your desires, and then listen to those inner responses without judgment. Those different voices are different parts and different aspects of our psyche and our personality. And here is a sign that you're doing it right, right? Number one is you're no longer afraid of yourself, and you're no longer judgmental of the darker aspects of yourself, right? But because you've been able to embrace them and befriend them. And it feels like a curtain is lifting, and you'll be able to see the world literally through a new pair of eyes. So there will be challenges, right? There will be obstacles, just because this is not something that's very easy to do. It's gonna be pretty challenging to look at yourself in this new way, and it can be scary, right? But my biggest advice is to lean into the fear instead of running away, because where the fear is, that is your task, right? That's probably the deepest, darkest aspect of yourself that we really need to integrate and acknowledge. Patience and self-compassion are the most important aspects of doing this kind of work. If you're not sure where to start, don't be afraid to ask for help, right? It is quite a daunting task to acknowledge and integrate your shadow. So find someone that you can trust, right? You can ask them some of these questions, and hell, they can even send me a message. So for those who are already on this journey, right, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear your experience with your own shadow. Very few people are aware of this sort of work. And if you've made it this far, I want to congratulate you on the journey of understanding yourself so that you can live more authentically. Let me know in the comments what other related topics I should cover on the mind, and thank you for joining me.